Two teams are at a critical crossroads tomorrow night when Steph Curry's Golden State Warriors face Ja Morant's Memphis Grizzlies. Golden State has been showcasing glimpses of championship potential, specifically with Jimmy Butler going 16-4 since the trade deadline, and showcasing the fact that with Jimmy Butler, they really do have that secondary offensive creator that can change their fortunes. Meanwhile, Memphis is still struggling to adapt to life after Taylor Jenkins' shocking firing, and it seems like they might be caught between a rock and a hard place, or Ja and the rest of the team. The team still needs answers, and they haven't found it in the recent Lakers game when they essentially got blown out in the fourth quarter. But the Western Conference standings doesn't give either team a chance to break. In today's video, we're going to break down what I think is going to happen in the Memphis Grizzlies versus Warriors game, and why I think the Memphis Grizzlies have made moves at the coaching position, and how it's going to affect the overall game. With that in mind, let's get right into it. So first, I think we have to address the Memphis Grizzlies. They started off the season 40-24, but they have gone 4-6 in their last 10 games, falling from second in the Western Conference to now fifth and maybe sixth if they lose to the Warriors and the Celtics in back-to-back games. The big stat that everyone's been hitting on this entire time is the fact that they've only won 11 games versus 500 and above teams and losing more than 20. And that's key because to win in the playoffs, you're going to be playing against mostly above 500 teams, and specifically in the Western Conference, everyone who's going to make the playoffs right now is going to be above 500, and you need to win above 500 or above 50% of those games that you play. And so the question then becomes, okay, we're struggling versus above 500 teams, so that likely means that something's wrong with the system, right? Well, not so fast. Ja Morant in the past has excelled in the pick and roll, and that's something Taylor Jenkins has run in the past a lot with a player like Ja Morant. It allows him to get some momentum running downhill and allows him to create space. And Ja running downhill is probably one of the most efficient plays in the NBA, even as he struggles with injuries from time to time. But with their new coaching staff, where essentially the Memphis Grizzlies and their GM Zach Kleiman fired everyone in the assistant GM staff and made it so that Taylor Jenkins had to basically get a GM-picked staff, which a lot of them were from Europe, who love to run the pace and space type of system, not prioritizing the pick and roll, and instead prioritizing everyone else on the team. It's clear that there was a shift in philosophy. Taylor Jenkins liked the grit and grind philosophy, liked the philosophy where he empowers young players in the pick and roll. But it seems like the new Tomas Isolo, who's coming in, is going to prioritize more of the space and individual accolades of other players, not named Ja Morant. Jaren Jackson Jr. has had a great deal of success this season because of that, because he's been prioritized a little bit more, and because he's been able to exploit his matchup. I think a great example of what's been happening is the Knicks game, where Jaren Jackson Jr. actually had a great game, but Ja Morant was shut down with less than 10 points because he had Mikal Bridges on him the entire night, and they weren't setting screens with Jaren Jackson Jr. onto Mikal Bridges to give Ja Morant a mismatch whatsoever on Jalen Brunson, a smaller guard that Ja Morant could definitely take advantage of. I think overall, though, this coaching change speaks to there's a lot of changes that are going to come in the offseason, and Ja Morant is definitely going to be at the center of those changes. Whether or not they decide to extend him even further, or whether they try to make his role more prominent in the rest of the season, remains to be seen. Overall, though, if I were to give my take, I don't agree with firing Taylor Jenkins. I think Zach Kleiman has been doing a great job of picking talent for this Memphis Grizzlies team, but I just think that Taylor Jenkins had something else to give. He's been doing great this season. They hit a rough patch, but I think he deserves a chance to show in the playoffs what he can do. He's done well in the playoffs before, and honestly, I think he's overachieved every single year, but this year, where I feel like he's been underperforming. So I really think they should have given him another chance. But what does that apply to this game? I think it means they're a little bit of a wild card in terms of what offense they might roll out here for the Memphis Grizzlies, and that could provide a huge advantage for them. The Warriors probably were thinking they weren't going to run a lot of ball screens because that's what they've been doing all season, but now with a new coach taking over and a little bit of a break, it's possible that they could run a lot of ball screens, could run a lot of plays empowering Ja, which would make it tough for the Warriors, who are without GP2 for the rest of the season after his thumb injury. I think a reason, though, that they've been struggling versus good teams has to do specifically with player personnel. Zach Edey makes them play big. By drafting him top 14 in the lottery this last draft, they essentially try and make it so that they're ultra big. They have Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey play on the back line, which is probably one of the biggest back line in the league. Sometimes they'd even play Clark and Santi Aldama, making them even bigger, with Ja Morant being their smallest player in their starting lineup with Desmond Bane. And that makes them a formidable foe for somebody like the Warriors. But a big struggling point for Edey and Jaren Jackson Jr. is that they're 4 of the top 20 players in terms of fouls. They foul a lot. Edey is top 10 in terms of fouls this season. Jaren Jackson Jr. is top 20, as well as Scottie Pippen Jr. and Brandon Clark, who's now out for the season. I think this speaks more to their youth. I think you saw this a lot when you watched the Lakers game. Staying disciplined on defense versus players like Luka and LeBron is something that this Grizzlies team struggles with, which is why I think they did so well early in the season when players aren't as locked into the scouting report, aren't as locked into the games altogether. But as the season wanes, you saw Jaren Jackson Jr. get in terrible foul trouble versus the Lakers that prevented him from playing over 30 minutes in that game and essentially led to them losing, I believe, because when they were gaining momentum, he would commit a stupid foul or put his hands where it shouldn't be and end up fouling. And I think this is a big problem with their team as they go into the playoffs and even in these last couple of games in the regular season. And this system that they have has empowered players like Scottie Pippen Jr. I think that's been a big positive. But Ja Morant's averages are worse than they've ever been. He hasn't been able to get the matchups he wanted. And as I kind of posited earlier with the Knicks game, it's really just a microcosm of what this season has been for Ja Morant. It just hasn't been a great season. He's only played just over 40 games with the Memphis Grizzlies because he's been dealing with hamstring and calf injuries. And honestly, one thing I really want to hit on is just the energy of this team is not where it used to be. It feels like OKC just sucked all of the energy out of this Memphis Grizzlies team from last year and the year before and left them with nothing. This team doesn't feel like it has that kick that it needs. And honestly, maybe even Dylan Brooks provided that, who's on the Rockets, and they're now doing so much better than this Memphis Grizzlies team. The last point to make with all Memphis Grizzlies teams is the defense. This used to be a top 10 defensive team, and from the start of the season, they looked like a top 10 defensive team. But as of recently, with Ja coming back, it doesn't look anymore like a top 10 defensive team. Specifically when Jaren Jackson Jr. continues to foul and Zach Edey also being top 10 in fouls, it's really not looking good for the back line for the Memphis Grizzlies. Sure, Jaren Jackson Jr. is still an elite defender, but Ja is not an elite wing defender. He's not even a good wing defender. He's probably just slightly average as a wing defender, and they don't really have anybody else. Scottie Pippen Jr. isn't a great defender as well, and Desmond Bane is probably an average to slightly above average defender. But as we move into the playoffs, as they play Western Conference teams like the Golden State Warriors, like the Los Angeles Lakers, like the OKC Thunder, they need elite wing defenders, and they just don't have that right now. Santi Aldama is probably the best in terms of the plethora of skills that he offers to defend wings, and even he's probably not enough to guard many of the scorers in the Western Conference. Now, some of the positives, though, about this Memphis Grizzlies team that I could see playing out is definitely Scottie Pippen Jr. He's been running it well with the second unit, and I feel like he offers what Tyus Jones did back in the day with this Memphis Grizzlies team. He offers a totally different style. He runs the pick and roll pretty well, and he also is good at the pace and space type of system that they run. It's really empowered him to be a better player because he's a better three-point shooter than Ja, and he has quick moves towards the basket. He understands how to attack closeouts, which I feel like is the primary ability of this new system that Thomas Isalo is going to try to run. I think that makes Scottie Pippen Jr. a little bit better. And Aldama also has been great this season. He's been very consistent and has been shooting well from three. And they do offer nice size versus the Golden State Warriors, which I think could be exemplified with Zach Edey plus JJJ. And I think if the Warriors aren't able to kind of run them and make it so that their size is not a benefit, then it's going to be really tough for the Warriors. They always struggle versus these big teams, especially in the regular season. So I expect the Warriors to kind of recognize that, hopefully use Quinton Post a little bit more, but it's definitely a point of a positive with the Grizzlies that they have a huge front line, and they can essentially play everyone that's 6'5", 6'6", and above besides John Morant, which provides an incredible opportunity for them to just bully ball the Warriors, although that's not something they've been doing lately as their offensive philosophy has changed. With that in mind, let's move right over to the Warriors. I think it goes without saying, the Warriors lose dumb games. They lose games they shouldn't lose, and they lose games by giving up a lot in the first quarter. 40 in the first quarter to the Hawks, and losing by over 10 in the first quarter to the Heat. When the Warriors start off slow, it seems like sometimes they never really get going. Now, the Spurs was a different story. Just recently, they were able to essentially score 44 points in the first quarter and really do a great job of attacking on the offense and turning the ball over on the Spurs. But if they start off slow, they can lose to anybody. Literally, they lost to the Jazz, they've lost to the Hawks, they've lost to the Heat, some of the worst teams in the NBA. But recently, it feels like their focus has been aligned, and sure, it's been a lot of games on the road trip, but it seems like they finally found their mojo. And what speaks to that more than anything is they're now top 10 in both offense and defense, and they're top 5 in defense when Jimmy Butler and their whole starting lineup is playing. And that lineup, Moses Moody, Brandon Podziemski, Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green, has been an insane starting lineup for them, and they've been continuing to start it game after game after game, giving them consistency. The only problem right now seems to be their three-point shooting. They're generating some of the best looks in the NBA per cleaning the glass, but they aren't shooting well. They've had many games of the past 10 where they're currently 8-2, shooting under 35% from three, which is well below league average. Steph Curry continues to provide space for players like Brandon Podziemski and Moses Moody, but besides last game, both Brandon Podziemski and Moses Moody have been in a bit of a shooting slump on this road trip, which has contributed to some of their losses. Hitting wide open threes is at the center of this Warriors roster, and that's why they can lose to anybody, but also beat anybody right now. Jimmy Butler does give them a level of consistency, however, which I think will be very appreciated in this game versus the Memphis Grizzlies, where the Warriors have also improved at getting free throws at the free throw line as a whole team, but I think Jimmy Butler will be able to draw fouls on players like Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey, which will allow the Warriors to set their defense on the other end and also get free points on the offensive end. Some of the concerns, however, is that Jimmy still hasn't had one of those Jimmy Butler games where he scored 30 points, 40 points, or really been that secondary star. And it kind of leads us to wonder whether or not he is. Is he that guy anymore? Is he that guy that can score 30 or 40? Personally, I believe he is. I believe he can still do it. He's just saving it for the playoffs, trying to get everyone else involved. But that's still a question that we have to ask. And another point of contention for this Warriors roster is Kuminga and GP2. GP2 was supposed to step up into that role that guards a player like John Morant. But now he's out for the season. I don't know who we can really trust to guard a guard like John Morant and really lock him down or make his night harder. Steve Kerr offered up Kuminga as a potential example. Obviously, Kuminga might be injured again with the same ankle, but even if Kuminga was healthy, sometimes he gets a little bit lackadaisical guarding the ball, and he definitely isn't as good as GP2. He's also not the connector that GP2 was. GP2 knows that he can't really take a lot of three-point shots, should only take them if they're wide open. Sometimes Warriors fans, including me, get really frustrated when Kuminga kind of drives downhill, doesn't really know what he's doing, just kind of throws the ball at the rim and hopes it goes in, hopes he draws a foul. And sure, he's drawing a lot of fouls, but a lot of times it doesn't get the offensive inflow, and it feels like that's why sometimes his plus-minus isn't the best on the team, and he isn't really affecting the team in the ways that we need him to. So how do I think the game will go? I think if the Warriors start fast, it's going to be an easy dub. But if the Memphis Grizzlies gain some momentum early, specifically I think John Morant playing well, then it's going to be a tough game. I think Jimmy Butler will be key in this game to stop the Memphis Grizzlies from getting in any momentum by drawing fouls early. But I think overall with the Warriors' top 10 defense and offense and them being keyed in to making sure that they ascend a seed, and this being such an important game, means that they'll end up coming out the victors. If you guys like this type of content, please feel free to like and subscribe, and let us know if you like some of this monologue content that adds to the Golden State Warriors fandom. Thank you guys for watching.